It is truly my pleasure to be here this evening, and my goal truly is to help you better understand this important developmental milestone and to answer any questions that you have along the way. So, as Joan said, I'm Joan Morgenstern. I currently work at Senders Pediatrics. My role at the pediatric practice is as parent coach and community outreach. But I often like to say my claim to fame is that I'm a potty champion. And I describe myself as a potty champion with a capital PEE. We're actually talking about something very important, an important kind of slash serious, but we can also have fun in the potty space. And the reason why I call myself a potty champion is because I'm committed to ensuring that your children have desirable toileting outcomes. That's one of the things I'm passionate about. And I just like to share a little bit about how I entered into this space. As Joan said, we're both early childhood educators, both with master's degree in education. But it wasn't until I was a director of an early childhood program and charged with the responsibility of having to discern and figure out toileting policies as well as toileting procedures in our school that I realized I didn't know a whole lot about children's toileting. And actually, I think we can think of two cohorts of people that we look to for information around children's toileting. One are people in the early childhood space, and the other, and I know this from working in a medical practice, is medical providers. And here's the truth. Neither teachers nor medical providers learn this in their formal training. And because there really isn't a good way that this information gets disseminated, there is a lot of misinformation out there. So first, my challenge was to weed through some of the misinformation so that we could better understand this developmental process and we could launch it in a way that really supports healthy outcomes for children and the people who care for them. So when we think in terms of toileting outcomes, we can think that this is a time where children really can obtain very, very positive outcomes. I use an image of a three-legged stool because it's sturdy and it gives a very strong foundation. And when toileting goes well, children gain a sense of body ownership. They develop agency and autonomy that they can affect an important change. And all of that contributes to healthy self-esteem. That's where I want all your kiddos to be. But unfortunately, there are some children that in the toilet learning process that they experience what I call undesirable outcomes. Often they experience constipation, specifically if they haven't had a pre-existing medical condition. They can experience performance anxiety, like get your pee and poop in the potty, or generalized anxiety around the toilet. And sometimes for kiddos, this is the first time ever that they're actually experiencing the feeling of shame. So before we get started, we're going to play a little game here, and it's called True or False. Now, I'm not going to hear your answers, but see if you can answer it for yourself. First, question number one. Pull-ups are a useful potty mastery tool, and all children should wear them. True or false? And the answer? False. Pull-ups are just diapers that slide up and down. They're great actually if you're trying to practice dressing and undressing. But other than that, they are a diaper in disguise. Now, do not tell that to the diaper companies. They don't want you to know that. But transitioning from diapers to underpants actually marks the formal start of independent toileting. Question number two. Children should stop wearing diapers when they are awake, so that means when they're conscious and alert, as soon as you start independent toileting. True or false? And the answer is true. Children should stop wearing their daytime diapers when they start learning to use the potty. And I use this analogy. It's like trying to teach a child to swim without getting in the water. Kiddos can learn quite a bit about the toilet through observation, through indirect exposure, noticing what's going on. But their formal way, the most important way they're going to learn about the toilet is when you remove the diaper, put them in underpants, and they get to practice that new skill. What makes that feel so daunting is we're actually giving them the underpants before they've actually mastered the skill. But that's why I use the swimming analogy. We put children in a swimming pool and they get wet, just like they get wet when they're in underpants, before they actually have mastered the ability to stay afloat on their own. Question number 3. Daytime and nighttime dryness are often accomplished at different times. And the answer, that is true. Peeing when awake and peeing when asleep are not necessarily one and the same. That can feel confusing because it's the same child, the same bladder, and the same fluid. But most children learn dryness when they're awake and asleep at different times. And often that can be months and even sometimes years apart. Question number 4. Rewards like toys or candy are great ways to help children through potty mastery. And the answer, false. Rewards like toys or candy are for most children unnecessary in order to help them through potty mastery. However, recognition from adults can mean much more to a child than an M&M or even a sticker. That might sound surprising, but it's actually true. Question number 5. Adults can control whether or not a child uses the potty. And this probably is the most disappointing one because the answer is false. Adults cannot control whether or not a child uses the potty. Potty mastery is a child's job, and only they, despite our best efforts, can put their pee and poop in the potty. You can't do it for them. But you do have an important role. You're a supporter, you're a cheerleader, you're a guide, you're an encourager. But even in that role, our kiddos are in charge. And today's presentation, so thank you, you can just say to yourself, did you learn something new or did you get some of these right out the gate? Our agenda this evening is actually divided into 3 different sections. The first section is really about awareness, adult awareness in this category, and I use the acronym WHY, representing Wisdom Helps You. Then we move into the processes, and this is the part that's missing from most of the work out there in the toileting space, which is really what is involved in making sense of this learning through the eyes of a child. So we have awareness that helps. And lastly, we're going to move into the support, helping our wee ones. And if I was keeping with our potty theme, I might say helping our wee ones. Remember, we want to have a little fun in the potty space. So let's start with Wisdom Helps You. And I think the very biggest and most important shift that we make is that we really need to stop calling this potty training or toilet training and instead think of it as potty learning that results in potty mastery. After all, when we talk about it in terms of potty training or toilet training, it totally misses the mark. It's no different. That's why we didn't talk about it as walking training or talking training or feeding training or play training or emotion training, reading training. We talk about all of those as learning. And the same is true with the toilet. let's just compare and contrast the difference. When we think in terms of training, we think of it as something we do to another person with the goal of achieving a specific outcome. And if any of you work with personal trainers or know people who work with personal trainers, that's kind of a perfect image to conjure in your mind. It's your trainer is in charge and they give you a skill, and they typically do that even when they're very kind in a drill-like fashion. The adult's intention or the trainer's intention is this is something I need you to do, and that ownership belongs to the adult. And when we contrast it with mastery or learning, it's the process of acquiring a new skill that develops over time and certainly with patience. And instead of thinking about it as a skill that's going to get drilled, we're thinking about it and understanding it as a skill that will get learned. The adult's attention shifts from this is something I need you to do to this is something you'll be learning how to do. And the ownership of that falls on the child, not on the adult. And the words we use frame the approach. So when we think of ourselves as, well, my child is potty training, what we often do is we approach it through a habit training model. A habit training model means it's adult directed. It's based on timing and routines. For example, it's been 2 hours. It's time for you to try. Child goes because it's been scheduled. The focus becomes on the child's performance, and success really is equivalent to does the child comply or not. And we can contrast that when we think in terms of mastery, what we're really focusing on is spontaneous recognition. That becomes child directed. And spontaneous recognition is the child begins to notice and recognize their own body signals. They feel it and they recognize that when they have that feeling that there's certain action they need to take, that they need to go potty. The child initiates instead of the child complies. That initiation supports self-regulation, and the focus is on internal clues. Now, can we say, do many children end up using the potty from following a habit training model? I would tell you unequivocally, yes, it is possible. But here's what we don't take into consideration. If you're an adult rearing a feisty 2 or 3-year-old who's asserting their willfulness and is saying things like me, my, no, I do it, and you tell them to use the potty and they're not into it, you're likely going to get, potty pun coming, into a pissing contest with your child without any success at all. Remember, we already mentioned that children own this. We support it, but they own it. So if they're going to dig their heels in and not go use the potty, we're not going to have a lot of leveraging. So not only is it important that we shift to the child taking ownership because they notice and recognize their body signals, but the other thing that we don't give enough attention to is our body signals give us very important information, starting with toileting, but for the rest of our lives. So let's think about it. Initially, 2 and 3-year-olds are recognizing toileting signals. That's an early outcome of that. The long-term outcome, it supports digestive health and physical well-being. Body signals give us information about hunger and thirst. That long-term outcome, regulated eating versus overeating or undereating. Body signals give us information about our emotions, which long-term outcomes support self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And body signals give us information about personal space and boundaries, which impact in the long run all relationships, including healthy, intimate relationships. So we think so much of toileting as, oh, it's just about getting pee and poop inside the potty, but toileting really is one of the first and very significant ways that young children are starting to notice and act on their body signals. Now we're going to move into the processes, which is we have awareness that helps. Because it's very important that when we're supporting children's toilet learning, that we make sense of that learning through the eyes of the child. Why? Because I am just assuming, I don't know who any of you are, and there are almost 50 people on this call, and I'm guessing you all use the toilet now without having to think too much about it. It has become an automatic action. Even though you have to pause temporarily to go use the potty, it's integrated seamlessly in your day in and day out interactions. But here's the truth. Nothing about that is automatic for children who are in the early learning stages of using the potty. So we have to make sense of that if we're going to support them. And that is covering the learning, the skills, the desirable language shift we're going to make, and understanding the emotions and our relationship with children in the toilet learning process. So when we think in terms of learning, that there are two different types of learning. There's indirect learning, which occurs by observing others, and there's direct learning that occurs by specific instructions directed towards a child. Now, wherever you are on this toilet learning journey with your child, one of the things I encourage you to do is to ramp up healthy indirect learning. Why? Because when it is not directly applied to the child, stress is low. And when stress is low, learning increases. Even using this image right here, this little girl looks like she might be experiencing a little bit of stress. Once stress enters into the equation, our ability to learn new skills becomes diminished. A lot of stress, it becomes increasingly less plausible that meaningful learning is going to occur. So how do you use indirect learning? You talk about your body in very healthy ways without it being something that you're uncomfortable with, that you say to your child, I need time in the bathroom. I'm going to wait until my poop is ready to come out, and I'm going to sit and give it as long as I need for that to happen. That we can really start to model some of these things out loud because they're curious. And if they aren't joining you already while you're in the bathroom, you can talk in a proactive way about how good it feels to urinate and defecate and how important it is to take care of our bodies and how much energy we have when we do those things that keep our bodies healthy. We also want to think about toileting for our young kiddos as really in the very early stages. It's about body awareness and initiative. When we think in terms of body awareness, what we're thinking about is that children are beginning to notice their body signals, and initiative is that they're beginning to act on those signals. They're trying to make strides towards going to the potty when they feel those signals. But it's also important to know that actually the toileting sequence includes 9 specific steps. And this call, likely we have families somewhere between 2 and with children ages 2 and 4 on here. And what we know is that young children struggle with multi-step sequences. So because again, this is so automatic for us, we really need to break it down so we see all of the parts that are involved and where it is in the toileting sequence that children are going to look to their adults for assistance. It starts with they need to recognize the need to use the potty. Then they need to get to the potty on time, push down pants, sit on the potty, eliminate in the potty, wipe, flush, pull up pants, and wash hands. So we can see it's automatic for us, not automatic for our kiddos. Potty Mastery also combines 2 specific things. It combines a child's will and it combines 3 specific skills, and we're going to talk about both of those. When we think in terms of will, is first we have to see a child as capable of learning a new skill. Remember, most children start toileting not skilled at it. They have some understanding through observation, but really in terms of making sense of their body signals and being able to act on those body signals in a reasonable time, most of them are approaching this initially very unskilled. So we have to say to ourselves, is my child capable of learning? The other is, and this would never happen intentionally, but sometimes occurs unintentionally, is that we have to make sure that in the toilet learning process, that children don't end up feeling like their value or their worth is dependent upon what does or what does not land in the potty. Now, I work with hundreds of parents, and while I don't personally know you, I would doubt that anybody would say, my child is only worthy if they pee and poop in the potty. So it's not that that's how we feel, but sometimes because when children embark on toilet learning, parents, what I often say, get like overly potty focused, that they become so like immersed in when their child last used the potty and if something remarkable ended up in the toilet, that so much changes that the child feels like their value and their worth really is dependent on them successfully using the potty. So how do we counteract that? We maintain a strong and healthy connection with children throughout the toilet learning journey, and we don't make this feel bigger than it needs to be. We need to, for our own self, reference it as, wow, up to this point, your child's already mastered many different types of learning. This will be one more that they can add to it. When we also think about will, and I think that this is very, very important to recognize, is that in the early stages of learning, the effort a child expends is much greater than any reward. In the middle stages of learning, the effort becomes equal to the reward because they start to feel confident and competent in the toileting space. And the last part, which is where I'm assuming all of us are, is that the reward is greater than the effort, that we use the potty without really any big effort on our part at all. It is very seamless. And that's important to take into consideration because in the early stages, children are working very hard at this and the payoff is very small. So the connection with their adult leaders must remain intact because that safety fuels their persistence. And children need to feel from adults that we see them as capable of doing this even before they are fully competent, because that belief in their capacity helps them keep going when the effort really feels tiring. When we think in terms of potty skills, there are actually 3 specific skills that need to occur, here comes a potty pun, in one fluid movement. First is we start with intellectual awareness, that the child understands where pee and poop belong. And for most typically developing children, somewhere between 13 and 18 months, children learn that pee and poop belong in the potty simply by observing adults using the potty. But knowing and doing are not the same skill set. So we have to start with knowing, but doing requires the second piece, which is a physiological awareness, that the child makes sense, listens to, attunes to what's happening in their body. And then that needs to then connect to timing, that they're able to get to the right place at the right time. So they have to know, they have to feel, and then they have to move into action. And what do we know about young children? That they're not very good time managers, that they're living in the present. So working on timing is in anticipation of a need that actually hasn't even presented yet. So that we look at these skills and we say, oh, well, just because it's automatic for me, I understand why it's not automatic for my child. And even in that middle section, that physiological awareness, noticing what's on in their body, there are 4 different stages that children need to pass through. The first is they're clueless. That's the current stage. I don't have to worry about the potty, and it's not even on my mind. The second is the past, that they peed. The third is the present. I often say it's associated with that, like, uh-oh, I'm peeing. And lastly is the future, in anticipation of a need that has not yet even arrived. We're going to talk a little bit about the language. If you're like most people, the script we use when we talk to kiddos about using the potty is, you're a big boy or big girl, you get to wear big kid underpants and sit on the big potty. And in about 5 seconds, we've likely used the word big 3 or more times. But here's what doesn't get taken into consideration: the developmental struggle of children in their second to third year, the year where many of them are starting to focus on potty learning, is they want to be a big kid, they want to be a baby. It's an internal tug of war that's going on with them. And if you're telling your kiddo how big they are, big kid, big underwear, big toilet, and they're feeling nothing more than, I want to be a baby, that language is not going to work. So I say we have better language that you can use, and that is, you tell your kiddo they have a new job. Why do we say job? Because kids are intrigued by the jobs that adults do, whether they're jobs in your home or jobs out of your home or jobs that teachers have in child care centers. Kids want to emulate the world of adults. And then instead of telling them that they're a big kid, we give them a more empowering title. They're a body boss. And then we tell them what a body boss gets to do. They listen to their bodies so they can recognize when they need to pee and poo. And they take care of their body by putting that pee and poop in the potty. And it's awesome and so cool. And the only person who can do that job is that child. So again, we're going to make a language shift that's going to feel empowering when using big might not work so well. It also is better language for the fact we already talked about in the true and false, that most children do not onboard daytime and nighttime dryness at the same time. So let's consider that script when we say to a child, you're a big kid, you get to wear a big kid underpants and sit on the big potty. Except now when you nap and when you go back to, when you sleep at night, well, I guess you're not a big kid anymore. You're a baby. That script doesn't sound very encouraging or very empowering. So instead we tell kids, when you're napping and when you're going to bed at night, you're off your job, and that's why you go back to diapers or you go back to pull-ups. And you can even work and decorate a box that says sleeping diapers, daytime sleeping diapers. So those are separated from the underpants that your child is wearing during the day. Also, one of the things is, I think probably most of you have heard the saying that emotions drive behavior, but we rarely think about the emotions that are involved in children's toileting. So for some children, not all children, but some children will experience feelings of loss associated with giving up their diapers. After all, they and their diapers have been attached by the hip since they've been born. It's the loss of the known and familiar, the loss of the warmth that a wet or soiled diaper creates around a child's behind. It's certainly the loss of the freedom to urinate and defecate wherever and whenever a child wants. And for some kiddos, it may be the loss of babyhood that is associated with diapering. And even if your child doesn't have strong feelings of loss associated with a transitioning out of their diapers, what we do know is that this is a big transition for kids. And think about the transitions that occur just daily in your home. Those usually are likely not the smoothest moments that you're experiencing. Getting in the car, coming to table. One of the biggest transitions of the day is going to bed at night. And why are transitions tricky? Because things are in flux. And it's a time of uncertainty when things are in flux. It's a time of uncertainty and confusion. And when things are confusing, conflicting, or ambivalent feelings can arise. And if nothing else, at least initially, using the potty requires more effort for the child than simply peeing and pooping in their diaper. And we also want to touch on what happens to the relationship in the context of toilet learning. That this is one of the first times that children sense adults' frustration with their learning pace. Now, listen to this. It's their learning, not their behavior. I'm assuming that children have already experienced at some level, some degree of frustration with their behavior, but more with their learning. And it feels intuitively different to children, and that can create anxious feelings for them. For example, let's go down memory lane when children were learning to roll over or to sit up, crawl, and then the infamous walking. Every time they reached one of those milestones, and I can say this literally and figuratively, even with the missteps, such as with walking, what they felt from the adults was a lot of joy and celebration. But it doesn't feel that way so much around toileting, that we can scold or disapprove of accidents. And what I want to impress upon you, that the relationship, preserving that relationship which preserves children's willingness, is more important than what ends up in the potty. And now we're coming to the last section, which is a little bit about how do we help our wee ones or our wee ones. We're going to touch on child readiness, temperament, getting started, preparing your environment, books and play, and day one options. When we think in terms of readiness, it's important to know that we really are combining both the brain and the body, that they need to be working together in order for toileting to work. That we start with the child's interest and curiosity. And a lot of times I'll work with families and they'll say, well, my child is really interested in it. And that's a great place to start. But the interest and curiosity has to come with a regulated nervous system and some other skills that are on board, such as body awareness. Are they conscious of their body? The ability to pause. Can they tolerate mild discomfort or stress? And can they follow a sequence? So yes, both of those help to get the brain and body ready for the new learning. We also want to take a look at children's temperaments. So what we want to know is that children who are easy, flexible children, you know if you have one of those, because that's the envy of your neighbor who doesn't. But what they're like is easy and flexible children are adaptable to change. They're generally maintain an even mood. They have moderate emotional responses. They feel emotions, but they don't have big highs, don't have big lows. And they're comfortable or adaptable when routines change. Their potty strengths are that they're often willing to try, that they're less likely to resist if an adult suggests that they try, that they respond well to your encouragement, and that overall, because they're generally pretty adaptable, that they adapt well to new routines. What they need in the potty space is they need clear expectations, they need consistency, they need matter-of-fact tone, and they need encouragement, not for compliance, because they're your more compliant kiddos. They need encouragement to notice and act on their body signals. And one of the things you can say to these kiddos is you can say, Put your hand on your tummy. Is your body giving you a signal? That's a very different conversation than saying you need to go sit on the potty and try. And even if they don't want to sit on the potty, then you can move into it's important to try. Let's do it now. What you want to avoid is that they function on compliance and miss noticing and recognizing their body signals. So now let's talk about slow to warm up kiddos, because I bet some of you have slow to warm up kiddos on this call. What they're like, they're more hesitant with new experiences. They're very sensitive to pressure, and they can feel that pressure even when we think that we're being very diplomatic with our words. These kiddos are observant and thoughtful, and they need more time typically to feel safe, especially with changes. What are their potty strengths? That once they're comfortable, they tend to be very consistent, because that consistency anchors their feelings of safety. They're often very aware of details, so that they notice nuances in the in the potty mastery sequence. They're sensitive to their body sensations. Oftentimes, they're the kiddos that may not like to feel wet or dirty, and that they're loyal to routines once they're established, again, because it makes them feel consistent and safe. So what they need is they need time. They need preparation. They need time. They need to be able to practice sitting without any pressure to produce. We don't want to dismiss or ignore any of their fears that may be connected to sensitivity issues. And our goal here is to move slowly, not abruptly. My favorite line here is, take as long as you need. We're not in a rush. If they feel rushed or hurried, they may resist. And lastly, we're going to talk about the intense, feisty kiddos, and you know who they are if you're parenting one. What are they like? They have big reactions, strong preferences. People know they're there, and they're very determined, but also they notice when they don't have control. What are their potty strengths? That once they're committed, they're very capable. They actually like the agency that comes with their learning. They have a strong internal drive, a deep need for autonomy, and they're determined when they feel like they own the process. What they need is they need clear leadership, but not controlling leadership, because we've got to give some of that control over to them. They need choices that are structured. They need to be able to do the parts that they can do without adults overly controlling them. What we want to avoid with our feisty and intense kiddos is power struggles. So it will have nothing to do with the potty. They will resist it if they feel powerless in the process. We also want to prepare children before the transition out of diapers into underpants about 2 days in advance. What I often say, we don't want to spring this on them like, guess what, today we're going to give up your diapers. But we say about 2 days in advance, and we're going to be very calm about explaining. The more we can connect something concrete to the explanation, the easier it is for children to understand that a change is taking place. Here are 2 suggestions. You can also think of any other way that would make sense for your child. But one is simply to get a stack of diapers. You would have to kind of manage that, maybe 6 or 8 diapers in a 2-day period, and say, let's count how many diapers we have in this stack, and then calmly say, when these diapers are gone, you're going to start your body boss job. Every time you change their diaper, you notice the decreasing stack. The night before, there's only 1 diaper left, and you say, it's time for you to start your body boss job. The other is, this is a book that I wrote. It is a self-published book. It uses a very similar ritual that you would find with the tooth fairy. The difference is Diaper Doggy takes children's diapers when they're sleeping and leaves them underpants in return. The goal here is that we get children involved in the process. They help to pack up their diapers. They read the story about Diaper Doggy, and Diaper Doggy uses the Body Boss language, which is trademark language, so you will not find that in other books. Also during this 2-day period is the perfect time to get your child prepared for their new job. And what does that include? Certainly it includes getting underwear if they don't already have underwear. The other is this would be the right time to get a potty chair, and also to make sure that you have a step stool, that if a child is using the adult toilet, that you have a step stool that's high enough so their feet can be firmly planted. That children will have a very difficult time having a bowel movement on a toilet if their feet are dangling or if just their tippy toes are touching a step stool. So you can try that out. Step stools are different heights, toilets are different heights. Some toilets are low enough that you don't even need a step stool. But these are the things that are going to help your child be successful at their job. You also want to look around their room, and how do we now communicate that like there's a change that's happening? We don't have to do this in a very dramatic way. It's just if you still have a changing table or changing pad, you can remove that. Say, we won't need the changing pad now because you're going to be wearing your underpants and starting your Body Boss job. Similarly, all of the lotions, creams, wipes, all of those things that typically are in many different places in our house, often a child's bedroom or other rooms, are now going to be moved to the bathroom, because we're communicating to children that toileting now doesn't take place in other places in the house or out. It takes place in a special part of the house called the bathroom. And also, I encourage parents to find books about the potty. The library is full of wonderful, wonderful books, and whatever your child might be interested in, you're likely going to find a book around toileting that addresses it. There are pirates that use the potty, and Daniel Tiger uses the potty, and dinosaurs use the potty. Princesses, superheroes, firefighters, whatever might motivate your child or a way that they can be connected, you're likely going to find a book that's going to resonate with them. What we think less often about is putting potty props out, toys, things children can handle, manipulate, play with. Play is a natural distressor. So any way that we can bring play props, toys that have potty themes, whether it's a dollhouse like this with a little potty, or even getting a little potty for $1 stuffed animal that's actually mirroring the idea of transitioning out of diapers and transitioning into underpants, so your child can work some of that through with play. Oftentimes people will say it's day one, and I've heard that, well, we should always let kids go bare bottom. Is that what I should be doing? And my goal here is to give you 3 different options. The best option you're going to decide based on your child's temperament and what you know about your child. But I'm going to go through all 3 options, and I'm going to tell you the advantage and disadvantage of each option. The first option, of course, is underpants, which would be their job uniform, and certainly it's the normalized article of clothing that we wear when we're using the toilet. Why can that temporarily be a little challenging for children? Only children who use that snugness as a way of feeling like that it's harder for them to notice their body signals because it reminds them of a diaper. That's exactly why you don't want to use training underpants, which sometimes feel like, oh, we're just starting out. Well, training underpants feel like something we should put on our shopping list. No, because training underpants are absorbent. And the goal here is that underpants should provide a contrast for children, because the contrast is how they learn. They'll learn that it feels different than a diaper, so they understand that there is a change. So the advantage of underpants, it's what we're all wearing when we're using the toilet. The disadvantage, Sometimes it inhibits children noticing their body signals, which brings us to the second one, which is bare bottom. And by bare bottom, it's exactly what it sounds like, that and again, this is only something you could do at home, but you remove any barriers. The opportunity here is, with nothing around their behind, that children naturally become more aware or sensitive to the signals that their body is giving them. That can work for many children. Sometimes very highly sensitive children will find that it doesn't feel safe to not have a barrier around them, and that they will withhold because it doesn't feel safe. And anytime toileting doesn't feel safe to children, their only recourse is to withhold. And we never want children to withhold. No matter where it ends up, it's always better out than in. So again, can that be a helpful strategy? Absolutely, because while you're at home, it kind of, for many children, it will help them notice their body signals with greater ease. Can it also be an impediment to children who might feel like they're too exposed and it doesn't feel safe and they're more inclined to withhold? That is also possible. Which then brings us to the third, which would be the commando style. So some would say, well, and of course, commando, just in case anybody doesn't know, it's we wear outer clothing without underwear. So it would be pants without underwear. And while one might think, that kind of sounds like the best of both worlds, actually it creates some kind of barrier, but not enough of a restriction around a child's behind that they that it could make it harder for them to notice their body signals. Where this can get a little tricky is that sometimes that children, especially sensitive children, but really any child, that the fabric or the seam that can rub up against their genitals can feel very uncomfortable and irritating, and that can be associated with toileting, and then there can be resistance around toileting because of the association that they made. So again, they're all viable options. Which option works best will be what you know about your child. I'm coming to the very end, and I always say, as much as I gave some strategies, it's never wrong to bring your funny bone to your child's learning too. This is important, but it doesn't need to be serious, which is why I like to end with what I think is a bit of a funny quote, which is, happiness is like peeing in your pants. Everyone can see it, but only you can feel its warmth. And to all of you on this call, you can do this, and you can add this to your list of already so many parenting strengths. You can be an outstanding potty partner for your child. And that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Joan. Everyone, I just put a couple things in the chat. We have a survey link for you to fill out, and we are ready to take some of your questions. What an informative discussion. I hope you all can agree that this is a different take, but you can see how it is so sensible. Again, I used this with my child many years ago of talking about him being the boss of his body and having confidence in him and removing the changing table, the diapers, like leading up to it. So what a lot of great information and language to use, and then understanding. So we again, I put a link to our survey in the chat, and Joan has written a book for adults, as well as the potty book for children, the diaper doggy. So if you fill out the survey, you'll get entered into it, and you share your contact info in the last question. You'll answer all the things that we need there. You'll get entered into the raffle for one of those books. So we have our first question. Let's see, is how can an older sibling who is already potty trained be an ally in toilet learning for their younger sibling?
Mostly, I think the idea is that they're modeling it already. So that's impactful in a very subtle way. The other is that just to be encouraging. So again, if you're encouraging, they can model the words that you're using, such as "You're working hard to figure this out. Soon you'll see." We always want to use our language to pivot children in the direction we want them to go. And it's just a matter of time before long, soon you'll see. Before you know it, this will start to feel more comfortable. You're working hard, you're practicing. So we want to pivot children towards where we want them to go. We don't want to make a great big deal about any stumbles along the way. It is rarely smooth and even. It's always typically a little bit of, it ebbs and flows in the toilet learning process. And we really, I mean, whether it's a sibling is modeling it, that's outstanding. We want to make sure that they know the difference between judgment or criticism versus encouragement. So practicing with that with them. A sibling can do potty play. Let's play with our toys that the so and so is using the potty animals, dolls, whatever. That also can be very helpful. And typically kiddos can do the playing much more naturally than adults.
Okay, we oh, I'm worried I'm freezing. Can you hear me? Can you hear
I can
me?
hear you.
Okay,
I can hear you.
great. When our daughter recognizes she needs to use the potty, how long do we let her sit there? We've had times where she gets too comfortable but doesn't do anything, over an hour.
That's way too long. So things that you can say during that time is you can say is, so sometimes what happens if children get, these are possible scenarios, when children get stressed, that their muscles restrict instead of relax, making it very hard for them to actually release anything. That specifically happens even more around pooping than it does peeing. They actually have a paradoxical reaction. So one of the things that you can start doing is you can teach some deep breathing exercises, such as blowing a pinwheel and blowing bubbles, which help the muscles to relax off the toilet, then bring them to the potty. So let's turn the water on. Let's practice blowing bubbles. You don't have to say breathing. You can say, let's practice blowing bubbles. Um, let's practice blowing the pinwheel. And then you can say things like, if they're still not, say, you're feeling the signal and it's hard to let go, because that often can be happening. The other thing that can be occurring is that they realize that by being in the bathroom, they get lots and lots of attention. So there's a secondary payoff going on here. So I would say 5 minutes, 8 minutes, like max time. And you want to be supportive more energetically than over engaging with this, because that can create secondary payoffs, which is, I mean, I was working with the family and they're like, well, I read to her on the toilet and we look at pictures and we do this. And I'm like, rah, I was like, they're getting your undivided attention, where it's having very little to do with toileting and more to do with being able to have your undivided attention. And kiddos can kind of feel when we're like anxious, like, yes, yes, please, please, I hope something comes out. So you give it a time, you can set a timer when the timer goes off, and then you can try again. And again, we want to know is that their nervous system isn't relaxed, so it's preventing it from coming out, or is it that there may be some secondary payoff, and that would be more unconsciously, and they just enjoy that time that they're spending together in the bathroom.
Okay, so we have so many questions, and I'm conscious of the time. So I'm going to get to one that I think everyone might appreciate as well, and then another one that comes up in a couple of them about how to teach wiping. And is that something we should do once they've mastered recognizing when they need to use it? And then, of course, uh, if you can talk about, how maybe some of the language when they have a little accident,
Uh-huh. Great. So a few things. So let's go to the wiping first. Should we teach wiping? Yes, but how do we teach it first? We teach it through describing what we're actually doing. So you can talk out loud with this is how we wipe to keep our body safe, and now we're getting it clean and whatever. Not with a lot of energy, just very simply the way you would explain anything. One of the things that gets very tricky about wiping in kiddos is that, and you can see if you notice this with your own children, is that when children take toilet paper, that they tend to crumble it like into a ball, like it almost looks like a crumbled snowball, and their hands go over it, and it rests inside their hands, and then they go to wipe, and what happens is that they end up getting, if it's pee or poop on their hands quite easily, because what they're not wiping with is the toilet paper, they're wiping with their fist. So one of the things that you can practice doing is you can practice the idea of how to wrap toilet paper around their four fingers in a way when they're not on the potty, because that just makes it, they're already like, there's already stress when you're on the potty. So it would be like teaching them how to do anything when they don't actually need the skill. Stress is much lower, learning is much higher. So we first want to focus on what is the biggest impediment to that. The biggest impediment of it is how they hold the toilet paper. So we want to teach them how to hold the toilet paper. Then you want to practice. You can practice on dolls, that this is the way we practice, and that we can be very chill about even when they don't get completely clean. Not a problem, because in the evening that an adult makes sure through a bath or a sponge bath or whatever, that all of their body parts get clean. So practice is important. Practice off the potty will assist with that. So that's to the first question. And what was the second question, Joan?
Okay, there's so many here. And I just want to remind folks that we are recording this, and it will be available for you to watch later. So if you missed the first part where there was some really key information shared, I recommend watching that later. So some of them are asking about how to manage, and they're calling, so we call it potty learning, working towards potty mastery, not training. And Joan explains that early on in the presentation. But how to manage that for a 3-year-old with a 1.5-year-old sibling, because they can't remove the diapers and the changing table completely since they still need them for the
Right.
younger sibling.
Perfect. So some of the things that we can do is we can just put visual images on some of that furniture. So like just as a way, remember that we talk a lot of children, and I don't mean to disappoint any of you, but your kiddos aren't listening to a lot. Certainly they're not listening to everything you say. So anytime we're really trying to communicate something important, that when we connect it with the visual, it helps to reinforce the learning. So even just the idea of like putting a picture of the baby that's to identify this is who this belongs to now. These are subtle things. I mean, and it's not going to make or break. It just kind of communicates. It helps to tell the story about your new learning to the child who's on a new learning trajectory. It helps to tell it in a way that makes sense. So a picture like that can be very helpful. And similarly, putting their picture on in the bathroom, on the toilet seat or anything in the early stages as a way of reminding kiddos, this belongs to you and this no longer does. No different than when children go to childcare and their pictures are put on cubbies. It's to help children see which space belongs to them so that they can better identify. I thought, Joan, you had a question about when children have accidents and what to do.
Oh,
One
that
way
was,
that
yeah, that was just, I was just thinking people might be wondering that. That was my, yeah, that you're right. I was
I was
asking
just
that for
returning
them.
back to, one of the
Yes.
things people can start trying to say is you miss the signal. I say accidents. There's nothing wrong with saying accidents, but that's actually what they did, is a child missed a signal. They missed a signal to pee, they missed a signal to poop. And you're working hard to notice the signals. That's the that's the encouragement. Then the practical part is the more you practice, the easier it gets to notice the signal. When we say to kiddos, stop, put your hand on your belly, why are we doing that? We're priming them to notice that their body is communicating to them or not communicating to them. And remember, the long game here is recognizing and acting on body signals, not just going to the toilet because an adult tells you to go to the toilet. So how are we helping them focus? We have to focus before we can learn what those signals mean. So the first is stop for a moment, put your hand on your belly. Do you notice a signal? Maybe yes, maybe no, maybe they're not sure. They had an accident. Oh, that was your body's way of telling you it had pee or it had poop to come out. You'll know better for next time.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think one person was asking a question regarding when you were describing the children of the different temperaments and then also the different options of underpants, commando versus, I can't remember what the third one's,
Bare
but
bottom, bare
yeah,
bottom.
like they were wondering what would be the best for a strong-willed or intense child, underpants, and if so, are there specific brands that don't have too much restriction? So I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing I probably would try with underpants with the idea of, wow, you're a body boss and this is part of your uniform, letting them choose the underpants. Most typical underpants from like underpant companies like Hanes, Carter's. I mean, I'm not so familiar with the like kiddos underwear, but most of them just have normal like cotton underwear, and any of those would be totally fine. Things you want to say to your strong-willed kid, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but if it were a boy, it might be, do you want briefs or do you want shorts? Like those are things that we're giving them ownership of the process, and that ownership makes it um, in, that ownership increases their investment in it, and that's what we want with strong-willed kids.
Great. And is it helpful to introduce a child to sitting on a toilet before really diving into toilet learning? For example, including sitting on the toilet while still in diapers as part of the bedtime routine to get them accustomed to it, or would that be confusing?
So yes and no. So for your, if you have a slow to warm up child, that probably is super helpful to do. This is the key. And it's not that like it be helpful or harmful. It's like we want to say to children when they're sitting on the toilet and they're still in diapers, you're practicing what it feels like to sit on the toilet. So we want to be very specific with our words. They're practice sitting. That gives them a sense of what it feels like to sit on the toilet, and that can be helpful, especially with slow to warm up kiddos. But the idea, like if they're sitting on a toilet and we expect them to pee or poop in their diaper, then that just becomes confusing. So we're practice sitting so you know what it feels like to be on the toilet. Can be perfectly fine. Even when if they remove a diaper because they're very curious about it, and they then you can say you're practicing and pee ended up in the potty or a poop ended up in the potty while you were practicing. So we're just giving it a little bit more context. One of the things, and I didn't say it in the presentation formally, but I'll say it anecdotally, that unless you have a super slow to warm up kiddo, you want to be cautious not to put out lots of potty things before you're really ready to do it in earnest. And I want to explain why. On one level, it's because anytime we bring something new into our environment, most kids are pretty curious, and the novelty in and of itself has some allure to them. What do I do with this? Is this for me? Can I try it? Can I sit on it? But even more importantly than the novelty is that often when we bring out potty props really early, I mean, potty tools, so to speak, like little potties and things like that. We're putting them out as choices for children. And then, and they spend months with like, if you feel like sitting on the potty, great. And if you don't, great. It doesn't really matter because we're not doing anything about this. And then all of a sudden, like you're doing something about this and it's no longer a choice. And that's especially hard for strong-willed and intense kids that they don't have a choice in this anymore. It's that works a little bit better with the slow to warm up kiddos because it gives them a little more practice time. So really making sense of your child's temperament and knowing like, am I setting the environment up in a way that's congruent with how they learn and function in the world? But we don't want kids to feel unempowered, like, and a lot of choices, unless they're framed as practicing, and practicing gives you that way out. You make it available and it's labeled as a practice.
All right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm trying to do the more general questions that apply to more people first, and then if it gets specific, if you're willing to stay on a little longer, Joan.
Sure,
Um,
no problem.
so one mom says that her daughter her 4-year-old says that she's too scared to use the potty.
Hmm. So this is what we don't, we're going to start with what you don't want to do. And again, like it's probably a bit more of a nuanced question. It would be that for some children that have inhibitions around toileting, they sometimes are comfortable more often peeing in the potty, but not necessarily comfortable pooping in the potty. If anyone's on here and that's their situation. We're going to think of these as two separate skills, not as one skill. They're actually two separate skills anyways. We just group them together as one skill. If there's general aversion to using the potty, we don't want to say there's nothing to, you have nothing to be afraid of, because what it really is doing is diminishing what the child's emotional experience is. So we can say, thank you for letting me know you're not the only child who feels that way. And we have a plan to help you get comfortable with the potty. The best plan would be to bring together like some potty toys that there's no expectation that of using the potty, and that she gets to play it out with he or she gets to play it out with toys first. Then I would work to, our plan is that you sit on the potty, you practice sitting on the potty in your clothes with your diaper on, that we're just helping to create some bridge of comfort and familiarity. But we don't want to dismiss children's fears. If that was presented to me as a very, very general fear, it may be rooted in something very more specific. And oftentimes what can happen is, and I don't, again, there's the differences in the details, truthfully, but like sometimes a child can be enthusiastic about it and then experience something that really startled their nervous system around the toilet, and now they just have discomfort, generally speaking, around toileting. It's possible in this case with this question that they just don't have any comfort. But I would do it slowly. I would do it safely. Play is the safest way. Then I would do practice with no expectation.
Okay, great. And then, so this says, Joan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Question for you. I have a 5-year-old boy. He reached potty mastery at 3 during the daytime. However, he has never had a dry pull up at night. I've heard to wait until he has several days in a row of a dry pull up in the morning before trying underwear. Is that your recommendation? Do I just
Yes.
wait, or is there something, okay, I can do to help him?
No, it is. In
Yeah,
the nighttime is kind of tricky. And by
right.
nighttime, I mean when children are sleeping, it's pretty tricky. And the only thing that sometimes gets missed is that if a child happens to be constipated, that they can have bladder spasms that causes them to be wet. That if a child isn't constipated, you don't have to think about it at all. But if your child may tend towards constipation, it's something that could be contributing to the difficulty with staying dry at night. But the way it's presented, for right now, there really is, it is not something I would focus on.
Okay, and I'm just going to ask my colleague to put the chat, the not the survey link in the chat again in the meantime. And then before people go, I also want to recommend on our website, Joan has another program she did for us called Making Sense of Children's Emotions. I think the two of these go well together because, again, she provides this foundation for how to think about what the child's going through and the child's role and the parent's role. So I'll recommend that. So let's see. Any advice for getting my strong-willed 26-month-old more interested in being a body boss? Starting potty training him has been very different than body training my easygoing 4-year-old a couple of years ago. We're running into a lot of resistance. And so again, Joan uses different language, so I'll let you go to it.
Right. So I would start with you're in charge with your body. I wouldn't, you want to, and I'm sure you're working on this already, you want to be calm and composed and not have too much energy around this in either way. Because, what happens with the strong-willed kiddos is that it turns into a power struggle more so than it does into a learning experience. For everyone in the house to be modeling like just kind of body stewardship or just, positive body language, and to really try in terms of those skills. Like sometimes with strong-willed kids, it's a relationship thing. Sometimes it is that the learning, like that they have a very hard time pausing what they're doing so that they can use the toilet in a timely fashion. That can be hard for lots of kids, but especially strong-willed kids because it's an impediment to something that feels more meaningful to them, which would be what they're doing. Where you really want to be cautious of is that it doesn't start to in a significant way. I understand it sounds like it's creating some stress in the relationship, but fully erode the relationship. Because when that happens, the likelihood of recovering of pushing through the learning for successful outcomes can be more challenging. So, is there readiness? So I would look at what did it occur just too soon? Does he just need some more time? Do you need to just kind of lay back and let the chips fall where they may for a little bit of time? I mean, the thing with toileting is like we can't ensure the outcome. We can only support children for them to want to do that and looking at where that resistance might be coming from. Hypervigilance around children's toileting is a sure way to create resistance. What it basically says to the child is life was much more fun before anyone ever talked about the potty.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to end this soon. We'll just take two more. One's very specific to a situation. So, just someone asking, are there ever difficulties in transitioning from potty chairs to real full-size toilet?
So some of that would be, yes, there are, but not that, but typically that happens without a lot of challenge. When does it typically happen? When kids lack flexibility, or if a child had a bad experience. And when I say a bad experience, and this can feel tricky for adults, by bad, I mean that they had an uncomfortable experience that affected their nervous system while they were sitting on a toilet that they can't actually articulate or communicate to an adult, would mean that the little potty would feel much safer. Or if they are really, really, really slow to adapt and overly attached, then they can find one thing. And what is that usually from? Is that the potty chair is a sign of safety and that the big toilet doesn't provide that. But most children, so those are more extreme situations, but most children can make that transition without too much difficulty at all. And really, that many children like to emulate what adults are doing, and that's what adults do. And they're likely to observe adults doing it, so they want to kind of connect to the world of adults. But that's why really making sense of a child's temperament and knowing like how they learn and how they function. Why can potty chairs be helpful? To just go through it on the other side is A, it gives children very tangible choices. You want the big potty or the little potty. Also, that for some children, if they're very tiny, that it can feel more appropriately scaled to their body and feel less intimidating. The other is that children naturally have their feet firmly planted, which can mean that pooping in the potty just becomes technically easier for them to do when they're in a potty chair. If you have a very big child, then they can be kind of oversized for a potty chair. Like if it's a 5-year-old working on toileting skills that and they're an average size, they may be too big, quote unquote, for a potty chair. So those are things to take into consideration.
All right. And now this is the last question, but it's more specific, but still I have a feeling other people can learn from it. My son is diagnosed with autism. He's high functioning, but needs help here and there. He's 9 and still hasn't mastered the potty. How best can we continue to address the issue with the skills you've just discussed? We have a 2-year-old who we plan to potty train, but let's remember your language too. So I'm worried about the conflict between one on the potty and the older one not really there yet.
Right. So, like toileting the autism space is not really my area of expertise, so I don't want to misstep and say things. What I mean, and I'm wondering if you're already using visual cards so that it really cues a child into their into what the potty sequence is. What I would also ask, is it a lack of noticing their body signals so they're not able to notice it, or they notice it and they're not able to move quickly or act quickly enough on accessing the toilet? So those would require different things. Just in terms of noticing like body signals, things that we can say to kids if they're communicating, whether it's verbally or non-verbally, that one of the areas before toileting that we often get information about kids about body signals is around hunger. So whether kids are self-initiating or just complying with our initiative, that we can start saying things like, you're listening to your body, your body's telling you it's hungry, it's ready for a snack, it's ready for dinner, lunch, it's thirsty, that we want to use as much as we can the words listening to your body, so that we can help children notice information signaling that they're getting from their body. Eating is something they've already practiced a lot of, so we're just actually giving it context. And oftentimes kids will initiate with eating because they don't want to be hungry. The other is it possible that your younger child will be a motivation for your older child because it's one more person who's practicing and modeling, and that serves as a form of indirect learning where the stress is low. But there'd be more with could that, as much as it could be a problem, it also potentially could help in supporting the learning.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, we're all learning. Someone just said, thank you for asking and addressing my questions. Sorry for the language. Old habits, of course. This is
I get
this
it.
this is a huge shift in the way you think of things and the way it's been presented in the wider society. What Joan is sharing, I think you can see, makes so much sense. It's so wise. Unfortunately, it's not how this journey has been presented for a lot of people. So we're really grateful to Joan for sharing her expertise, her wisdom. Um, this will be recorded, has been recorded, and we will be sharing out the recording. Joan, thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
And
And thank you
everyone,
to everyone who was on the call and who
yes,
asked such thoughtful questions.
yes, and we wish you all well on your on this journey towards mastery, and we are confident you'll get there. And again, you can always go back to this presentation to help you help your child. Um, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Again, please fill out the survey in the link, and good luck. Thanks again, Joan.
Thank you. My
Wishing everyone
pleasure.
take care.